Back to one of the big stories of the day, the Fianna Fáil Parliamentary Party meeting in Athlone ahead of the next Dáil session. From there we're joined by Taoiseach Brian Cowen. Good morning, Taoiseach.
Good morning.
Now, Cian McCormick was talking to some members of your parliamentary party earlier in the programme. We heard Noel O'Flynn say that every Fianna Fáil TD is nervous about their seat at that meeting. With the party at 24% in a good poll, is fear the glue that's going to hold your party together through the next Dáil term?
And I think there's obviously, people are looking at that, but they're also looking at the longer term and the fact that we have a job to do in government. And I've been pointing out to the party yesterday morning that we have these issues of Lisbon and the NAMA legislation and, of course, the budget to consider in the next few months. And that's going to take up all of our time and concentration. It's a big task and it needs to be done in the interest of the country.
And you told your party it's time to get real, that there's no shirking, the stark realities ahead of it. We've heard Board Snip Chair Colin McCarthy saying there's no shortage of compassion, the shortage is money, the country's bust. And then we hear Beverly Flynn saying rural TDs are saying those cuts won't wash. As a woman, she can't wear taxing or means testing children's allowance. And that rural TDs are talking to you about massive and unacceptable cuts.
And I think everybody obviously uses the occasion of the parliamentary party to put their point of view, and that's just a democratic thing. That's normal. That's what happens in parliamentary parties everywhere. But I think the point is that the government have a job to do, and we have to work with our parliamentary party now as we make sure that we bring forward these proposals successfully. And as I say, the 2nd of October is the next important landmark, and passing the Lisbon referendum is an important part of the process.
They're going to have to vote for things they don't want to vote for. They're going to have to vote for things that voters will remember for a long time to come. They're looking at the polls and looking at the prospect of maybe 40 seats. How are you going to get them to do that?
No, it's terribly important to point out that this country has to deal with the public finance position. The facts don't change on the ground. And the issue is that because of the financial crisis that happened last year, our tax revenues are down over 30%, and we have to deal with that situation. Now, if it's not dealt with, the bottom line is that we put at risk everything that's been achieved, and that's simply not something that anyone can contemplate. Mm-hmm. So we have to begin over a period of years, make sure that we move the public finance position back to a sustainable level, and that's clearly the situation. And from our point of view, government has that task to undertake now, and we'll undertake it.
Jim McDade is right, though, isn't he, when he says that the longer you stay on in power, the more chance you face of getting wiped out as a party?
I don't accept that at all. I mean, Jim, unfortunately, isn't in our parliamentary party at the moment. But I think the important point is, from everyone's point of view, and everyone in the country wants to ensure that the government get on with the job. And the job that is at hand is simply one that is not unique compared to what other democratic governments are having to do, and that is to put our public finance position back into order and to ensure that we have enough credit in our economy to make sure that businesses can survive, those that are vulnerable but still viable can proceed, and that's what the legislation on the Asset Management Agency is about. These are things that have to be done. They are national imperatives, and we have to get on with that job.
Now, we're going to know the answer to the big question about NAMA tomorrow, which is exactly the price that's going to be paid for the banks. And again, another phrase from yesterday, you said you've heard all the catch cries about bailing out the banks, but to people out there who are taking pay cuts and maybe facing more pay cuts, who are losing public services, why are they having to pay for the arrogance and vanity of bankers and developers?
Well, of course, the whole purpose of this asset management agency is to ensure that we extend credit into the economy. And without a viable banking system, we can't do that. And we've got to do it in a way, of course, that protects the interests of taxpayers, and that's precisely what we're seeking to do. And I think it's terribly important that, when we come up with the second stage debate, Brian Lennon will set out in detail how it is we intend to ensure that a restructuring of the banking industry will facilitate bringing this country back to growth and ensure that we extend credit and get people able to continue with doing their business. And that's for ordinary individuals as it is for small, medium-sized or large businesses.
Will it be north or south of 60 billion?
Well, I'm not going to discuss that because it's very market sensitive. But what we are making sure is that the IOUs that will be provided by the agency enables the banks to get access to credit through the European Central Bank, and then over the management of those assets over a period of time, years ahead, we will ensure that the value comes back into those assets and that we ensure that the taxpayers' interest is protected. That's the whole purpose.
We're speaking on the anniversary of Lehman's going bust. Now, the banks there got bailed out by the American government, $700 billion. But they're now getting back to business as usual. They're back to the big bonuses. They're back to the trading in these risky derivatives. They're back to resisting greater regulation. Why would it be any different here after NAMA?
Well, the European Union, of course, have a very strong role to play in coordinating a financial regulatory system, both within Europe and vis-à-vis other parts of the world, to make sure that this issue doesn't occur again. And clearly, the regulatory system does have to be tightened up. The Irish government have indicated our agreement with that whole prospect, and we're working with partners at EU level to bring forward the necessary regulatory system that will, in fact, ensure that we deal with this situation properly and appropriately in the future.
Michael McGrath earlier in the programme told us that John O'Donoghue, the Ceann Comhairle, needs to answer more questions about what he called unacceptable and indefensible expenses, that there shouldn't be any hiding place. What should the Ceann Comhairle do?
I'm conscious of the fact that the Ceann Comhairle is an independent constitutional position, and he has indicated yesterday in detail, by way of letter, the situation that arose during the time in which he was Minister for Arts, Sports and Tourism, and he has expressed regret in respect of issues that arose there. I think that's an important point to make.
He was a minister at the time. He's Ceann Comhairle now. Should he not come out and talk about what he did as a minister?
Well, I mean, he has outlined, as I've said, what his position is, and he does hold the position of Ceann Comhairle, and that has a certain constitutional constraint on him. But
so are you happy if he says no more?
Right, I'm simply making the point that John O'Donoghue has outlined his position and has expressed regret, and I think that's appropriate.
And is that the end of the matter as far as you're concerned?
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Ceann Comhairle has outlined his position. As I say, as Taoiseach, I don't want to get engaged in an interface with an independent constitutional position.
Except, and this is the issue, that you are facing the challenges that you described to us and you described to your party yesterday.
Yes, and we brought forward...
How can a government that, you know, to the public it may look that you were living in fantasy land, in la-la land in terms of expenses, how can that public accept what you're saying about hair shirt and cuts? How can you have the credibility to impose what you need to impose?
Well, last July we have in fact changed the arrangements, and obviously there is a new regime now in place in respect of all of that, and that has been implemented by the government, and that's the correct and appropriate response to make sure that we have a regime in place in respect of all of those sort of issues which are in line with the sort of situation that we face at this time.
But do you not run the risk of seriously misjudging the public mood on this one? And that, do you know what I mean? In a way that they really do need to have addressed if they're to swallow the pain that's coming their way this winter.
Yeah, but I've made the point, Anya, that we have moved on this issue and we have made sure that there is a new regime in place.
But that's not answering the questions about the past.
But I mean, what happened in the past was in respect of a regime that was in place at that time. We have to obviously change that regime, and that we've done. Yes, but the point I'm making is that we have changed that regime last July, and we have a situation now that deals with that. And we have to make sure for the future that in respect of all of these issues, of course, the taxpayer has to be seen to see that there's appropriate arrangements in place.
And will that include the public paying for the Ceann Comhairle having a political advisor, which hasn't been the case up to John O'Donoghue?
Well, again, obviously, in respect of that matter, he has been involved in expanding the role of Ceann Comhairle, but obviously these are issues that will have to be dealt with by his own office now.
Do you have a view on the matter?
Well, my view is that it's very important that we ensure that we display to the public that we have a very strict regime in place that gets the very best value for the taxpayer in all of these matters.
One final question on Lisbon. Declan Ganley says the only person who'll lose a job, any job, if Ireland votes no is you. Is he right?
No, I don't accept for one moment what Mr Ganley has to say in respect of that. I mean, this is an important issue. It's a national issue for the country. And I think it's also, people recognise that 2 out of 3 jobs in this country that are in existence are dependent upon access to European markets. And that economic argument is a strong one, and I think it's one that's finding resonance throughout the country.
Of the three issues you've spoken about, the banks, the economy and Lisbon, which is the most important to the future of this country?
They're all important.
Which is the most important? Which is the trickiest to deal with? I'm
sorry, Anya, my answer is they are all important. We have to pass this referendum, in my opinion, for the reasons that we've been giving in the campaign, positive reasons, and I'm not getting involved in negative campaigning on that issue. Secondly, we have to have a viable banking system in this country. We have to restructure our banking industry, and we have to make sure that there's access to credit in the economy, and the Asset Management Agency bill is the only viable options on the table. And the third thing we have to do is we have to bring our public finance position into order in order to maintain to the greatest extent possible the progress that we have made and make sure we get this country back to growth. Delaying on those issues puts at risk and certainly lengthens the prospect of recovery for this economy, and that's not something we should contemplate.
Taoiseach Brian Cowen, thank you for joining us this morning. 9:30 now.